Very good afternoon to everyone joining us this afternoon as we talk about navigating the red tape and discussing the regulatory updates for MedTech in the United Kingdom. As you can see, United Kingdom has had a lot of discussion over the last few years because of Brexit. And this is a very timely presentation where we will be talking and discussing more about what exactly is happening in the current scenario. And we'll suggest some take-home actions of how the medtech manufacturers and other medtech companies can ensure compliance with all of these regulatory requirements, especially in the critical stage where Northern Ireland is still being following the UK and the EU MDR requirements. But I will let my colleagues discuss more in detail about it. Before we begin this webinar, I would like to tell everyone and inform that this webinar is being recorded and will later be hosted on YouTube for the recorded version for everyone who registered but couldn't attend or couldn't join due to some reasons. So if anyone has any issues with the recording, you could let me know in advance and I will try to exclude them from the recording bits and pieces. A little housekeeping while we will be discussing several topics today. There is a question and answer section in this meeting, and there is a chat room available as well. This chat room and the question and answer session will be moderated by me, and I will be there picking up all the questions towards the end of this session because some of the questions might be part of the next slide, which our presenters might be sharing. So I can see many of us have already started joining in, and it is going to be a very interesting session today. So without any further delay, I would like to kickstart this session where I will be welcoming my colleagues who are going to present today. Along with me today, there is Dr. Shahram Ahmadi, who is a regulatory and a quality consultant with MedTech. I am also joined by Jacob Skinner, who is a regulatory and quality compliance consultant with Global Regulatory Services. I am also joined by John, who is a software lead with EG Technology. And today's webinar of navigating the red tape, discussing regulatory updates for the medical devices in the United Kingdom is brought to you by Global Regulatory Services in association with MedTech, EIT Health, and EG Technology. So before I move on, I would like Shahram to give a little wave to all our audiences and all the people joining us and give us a brief introduction of what you exactly do with MedTech.
Thank you, Jay. Hello, everyone. I'm Shahram Ahmadi, Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance Specialist. I've been working in medical device technology industry more than 14 years. And my main area of specialty is quality assurance, regulatory affairs, and regarding medical device in different fields like manufacturing, design, also design verification, validation, and sales of medical devices have been worked. I've been working with different type and medical devices in different class, like class 2B medical devices and class 3. I can name that's implants, personal protective equipments, and dermatological medical devices. I also worked in the project to upgrade technical documentation from medical device directive to MDR to the companies. And also, I should mention that I'm an auditor in the quality assurance and quality management system area, especially for medical devices ISO 13485 and the new platform MDSAP for MDSAP for medical devices.
That's very extensive. Thank you, Shahram, for a brief introduction. And now I would like Jacob to introduce himself and his work with Global Regulatory Services. Over to you, Jacob.
Thank you, Jay, and hello, a warm welcome to today's webinar to all of you here. I'm Jacob. I'm a medical devices, regulatory affairs and quality assurance consultant here at Global Regulatory Services. My educational background began in bioscience. I then previously worked within a radiotherapy equipment manufacturer, including helping them to achieve successful regulatory approvals for a range of innovative devices placed on the EU and UK market. Over the past few years, I've had the privilege of guiding a wide range of our clients in the medtech industry through the complex requirements of the UK, the European Union, the USA, and beyond, specializing areas such as quality management systems, internal ISO 13485 auditing, biocompatibility, and the production of technical documentation and assisting regulatory submissions. At Global Regulatory Services, we specialize in helping our clients navigate the intricacies of global regulatory compliance. We are active and experienced in areas such as medical devices, medicinal products, naturals, and cosmetics. Our expertise covers the setting up of quality management systems, in particular ISO 13485, facilitating product regulatory approvals, ensuring ongoing post-market compliance. We are also able to act as a UK responsible person and as a UK virtual importer for our medtech clients. And our mission is to empower medtech businesses to focus on innovation and business growth whilst we take care of the regulatory burden and complexities for them. Back over to you, Jay.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That is quite a good introduction to global regulatory services as well. And just to let all our audiences know that the slides that you see right now will be shared later on with you all. But feel free to click some pictures or snapshots if required. And I would now request John to kindly introduce himself and how he works with EG Technology and also the collaboration between EG Technology and EIT Health. Over to you, John.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jay, and welcome to everybody to the webinar. Yes, my name is John Connor. I'm the software team lead at EG Technology. My background has always been in software. I started off in scientific instrumentation and moved through industrial units onto telecommunications, and I've ended up in the medical devices world. In there, we are a user of the regulatory systems that are in place for design and medical and devices. So we're very much a pragmatic user and exponent of all the standards, the 13485, 62304, 611010, 601, 60601, all of those that are required for medical devices. We use them on a day-to-day basis. EG Technology is an engineering design consultancy. We've got offices in Cambridgeshire and in Galway, and we comprise software engineering, electronics engineering, mechanical design, industrial design, everything you need to actually make a medical device. We specialize in the development of medical devices, but we also do scientific instrumentation, agri-tech, femtech, consumer products and devices. The classification of medical devices has been everything from class 1 all the way through to class 3, everything from an incubator to just a small component. And in terms of software, we've gone again from class A all the way through to class C. It's a broad range. It's our medical devices is what we specialize in, so we use all the regulations on a day-to-day basis. We are also co-located with Medidia, so that we both have offices in Cambridgeshire and in Galway, so we both work alongside each other. So certainly it's a partnership that we're growing. Back to you, Jay.
Thank you so much, John. Yes, indeed, we are happy to share that we share our locations quite closely, not just in Cambridge, but also here in Galway. So that's the entire collaboration on how easy we are trying to make for medtech manufacturers to get their products and innovations into the market. Just as we continue, I would like to introduce you to Global Regulatory Services, also known as GRS. GRS is a regulatory and a quality compliance consultancy that has been supporting. Oh, did I move the slides? Yeah, anyway, it's right there. Global Regulatory Services is an award-winning global consultancy offering a holistic approach to the regulatory and quality compliance requirements of the life science industry. GRS supports companies with emerging novel technologies, from foods to herbals, medical devices to IVDs, pharmaceuticals to regenerative therapies and borderline medicinal products. You can reach out to the teams at Global Regulatory Services by visiting our website or by sending an email to grs@globalregulatoryservices.com. Along with GRS, I can also introduce you to Medidia. As the name suggests, Medidia is an abbreviation of medical devices, digital health, and diagnostics. It is one of Ireland's top regulatory and quality compliance consultancy firm that is specialized in supporting medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and digital health companies from our base in Galway. We very actively represent all the non-European medical device manufacturers as an EU authorized representative. And we also act as a person responsible for regulatory compliance, that is PRRC, which are two of the mandatory roles depending on the cases introduced by the EU medical device regulations. We support companies in EU market access and FDA regulatory submissions and much, much more. After Medidia, I would like to give a spotlight to EIT Health Ireland and UK. EIT Health is Europe's largest health innovation network, and they are also our co-presenters for the day for this webinar. And EIT Health is part of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. As I mentioned, it is the largest innovation network, and they bring together the brightest minds from the worlds of business, research, education, and healthcare delivery to answer some of the biggest health challenges facing Europe. Their vast community connects 130 plus leading partner organizations with thousands of startups, entrepreneurs, and healthcare professionals. And they fund projects and programs across education, innovation, business creation, enabling the healthcare innovation needed by the Europe's economy to grow sustainably. There are certain calls that the EIT Health has active, and as and when we progress through this webinar, I will be sharing some more information on that as well. There is a separate slide to talk about them. Again, going back to what John already mentioned about EG Technology, I would just give them a brief introduction. EG Technology is a global product development specialist run by client-facing technical experts. They are very actively promoting the design development of different types of products, not just in the life sciences space, but they cater to food and beverages and other industry sectors as well. You can visit their website, which is right on their screen, and you can check out EIT Health as well. So that's me. I have taken a lot of time of this webinar, and now let us begin discussing today's main agenda, which is the regulations and the updates and what is happening in the MedTech within the United Kingdom. So Jacob, I would like to invite you as our first speaker, and please take over and share your screen and guide us through the presentation.
Thank you, Jay. So today's session is really designed to give you a comprehensive overview of both the current state of UK MedTech regulation and also a little bit of insight on the future direction that we expect the regulation to take over the coming few years. My section will explore the historical context, the transition to UKCA marking, and also the transitional provisions surrounding CE marking, Northern Ireland's unique regulatory position, and the future of UK regulations as far as we know at this time. I'll also touch on digital health technologies and how these interact with the NHS and how we can design, develop successful digital health technologies to be accepted within the wider UK health system. So let's begin by taking a look back at the history of UK regulation. So the UK has a long history of being part of the European regulatory framework. When the UK was a full EU member state, we followed the Medical Devices Directive, the Active Implantable Medical Devices Directive, and the In Vitro Diagnostic Directive in the UK. And this was implemented into national law through the UK Medical Device Regulations 2002. At this point, all devices placed on the UK market were required to carry a CE mark to be sold, and this was the norm up until Brexit. Following Brexit, the UK regulations began to diverge from those in the EU, which created a little bit more of a complex environment for medical device manufacturers, distributors, suppliers, and end users. The UK Medical Device Regulations 2002 was amended. There's been quite a number of amendments throughout this period. And UKCA marking was ultimately introduced. Unlike the European Union, in 2021, the UK did not implement the EU's new medical device regulations or the in vitro diagnostic regulations, and instead we retained much of the older regulatory framework from the EU directives, with minimal changes which really focused on new registration requirements with the MHRA and labelling requirements surrounding UKCA marking, as well as the introduction of a mandatory UK responsible person for non-UK based medical device manufacturers. The original transition period for accepting CE mark devices was originally set to end on the 30th of June 2023. However, this deadline was extended due to many factors, partly surrounding the availability of UK approved bodies, but also around the economic impacts of aspects such as Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic. This allowed certain CE mark devices to remain on the UK market for the time being, and we're currently in a state of regulatory transition where the MHRA has outlined future changes, but we're still transitioning across from CE marking to UKCA marking at this point. So we can see that for Class 3 and Class 2B implantable devices, these can be placed on the UK market under either an existing medical device directive certificate or an EU medical device regulation certificate. And they can be placed on the market under a medical device directive certificate only up until the 31st of December 2027. For Class 2B and Class 2A devices under the medical device directive, these can be placed on the market until the 30th of June 2028 under medical device directive certificates. However, it's important to note that for these legacy devices, they must comply with the requirements of Article 120 of the EU Medical Device Regulations, and an Article 120 declaration must be submitted to the MHRA. For devices which do obtain an EU Medical Device Regulation certificate or a self-declaration to the EU Medical Device Regulations, these can remain on the UK market until the 30th of June 2030. It's important to note that for these Class 1 devices which were not reclassified by the EU Medical Device Regulations, these must either meet the requirements of the EU Medical Device Regulations or the UK Medical Device Regulation 2002 and be the UKCA marked from today. So now let's look specifically at the timelines and transitional arrangements for in vitro diagnostic devices, IVDs, on the GB market. I think this is an important distinction because the IVD sector has its own specific timelines and challenges during this transition period. Similar to medical devices, under the UK Medical Device Regulations, the UK chose not to implement the EU IVDR. And instead, the IVD requirements from Great Britain are still largely based on the older EU directive. The transitional period in place follows a phased approach, allowing existing CE-marked IVDs to remain on the market for a set period. And actually, general IVDs that have been reclassified under the IVDR can remain on the market for the full length of time until the 30th of June 2030, unless they have been reclassified to Class A under the IVDR, in which case they must comply with either UKCA marking through the UK MDR or obtain an IVDR CE certificate. This transition gives IVD manufacturers placing their devices on the Great Britain market more time to comply with UKCA marking requirements. And depending on the classification of the device, this is critical to maintaining market stability for these manufacturers while they adapt to new UK-specific regulatory demands. We can now turn our attention to the specific requirements that surround UKCA marking of products. So, UKCA marking is the primary requirement for medical devices on the Great Britain market post-Brexit. As I mentioned previously, the marking is based on older EU directives like the MDD, AMDD and IVDD, but with some distinct differences. It's important to note that UKCA marking applies only to Great Britain and is not acceptable in Northern Ireland. Manufacturers who choose not to transition to the EU MDR or IVDR cannot take advantage of the longer transition periods, and so their devices will need to comply with the UK MDR and they will need to apply the UKCA mark. Also, if they're based outside of the UK, they will need to appoint a UK responsible person and follow specific labelling and conformity assessment requirements. Conformity assessments against the UK MDR must be performed by a UK approved body. Importantly, a bit of a change in scope is that UKCA marking still does not cover products with no intended medical purpose, such as some cosmetic devices, which are covered under Annex 16 of the EU MDR. So let's have a think about the key differences between the EU medical device regulation and the UK medical device regulation as they stand today. And these differences are crucial for manufacturers who are currently navigating both markets. Firstly, and importantly, the scope of the regulation differs. The EU MDR covers both the EU market and Northern Ireland, whereas UK MDR requirements so far as UKCA marking are concerned are applicable only to devices placed on the market of Great Britain. So what this means is that devices in Northern Ireland must comply with either the EU MDR or the IVDR due to the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework, while Great Britain has its own distinct requirements under the UK MDR. And one of the most significant differences in the two regulations is regarding device classification. The EU MDR has introduced much more stringent classification rules, which have resulted in many devices, particularly software and reusable surgical instruments, being upclassified. However, in contrast, the current UK MDR still follows the older classification rules from the MDD, AMDD and IVDD, meaning that devices in Great Britain are generally subject to slightly less stringent regulatory requirements. Another important distinction is the representation requirement. In the EU, non-EU manufacturers are required to appoint an EU authorised representative. However, in Great Britain, the equivalent role is the UK responsible person. This person must be located in the UK, and the UKRP plays a similar role to the EU authorised representative, but subject to different local rules. Thinking about clinical evaluation and clinical data, the EU MDR currently requires a more robust demonstration of clinical evidence, particularly around very high-risk devices, such as those in Class 3 or Class 2B implantables, for example, and there's less reliance on equivalence to previously approved devices allowed. The UK MDR, on the other hand, still allows the use of equivalence in line with the older MDD standards and MEDEV guidance. Additionally, the EU MDR imposes much more stringent requirements for post-market clinical follow-up, periodic safety update reports, and having a full PMS system in place, whereas the UK currently follows the old MDD requirements surrounding this. Although, just to stress, this is likely to change very soon because there is an amendment to the UK MDR likely to go into force before the end of 2024, which amends post-market surveillance requirements, and I will discuss that in a little bit more depth later on. Finally, in terms of traceability, the EU MDR mandates UDI, Unique Device Identification, and the registration of devices in the UDIMED database. which is still kind of in the process of becoming fully up and running. And this enhances traceability across the EU. The UK does have a public access database yet, but it's not really an equivalent to UNIMED. But there are some ideas floating around and some proposals that have been announced by the MHRA to develop this further to meet future traceability needs, which may include the introduction of UDI at a later date. So just to summarise, the UK is still based on the older EU directives, while the EU MDR has moved Europe towards a more comprehensive and stringent regulatory framework. This divergence really means that manufacturers need to be careful to navigate compliance depending on which markets they're accessing. So now that we've covered UKCA marking, let's look at the more unique regulatory situation which we currently find ourselves in for Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland, I think it's quite well known, presents a unique regulatory challenge because of the land border with the EU and the Republic of Ireland and no customs or controls. So because of this, to ensure that devices placed on the EU market in the Republic of Ireland meet the necessary requirements, we have the Northern Ireland Protocol in place, which states that Northern Ireland must continue to follow the EU MDR and IVDR, while the rest of the UK follows the UK MDR. This ultimately means that any medical device sold in Northern Ireland must comply with EU regulation. Devices that are placed on the Northern Ireland market can bear the CE mark, or they can bear the UK NI mark plus the CE mark, only if they were conformity assessed by a UK approved body against the IVDR requirements. However, for Northern Ireland-based manufacturers, they can benefit from what they call unfettered access to the Great Britain market. This means that CE marked or UK NI marked devices that are produced in Northern Ireland can be sold in Great Britain without requiring additional UKCA marking. However, on the flip side, UKCA marking is not valid for placing devices on the Northern Ireland market, which does complicate matters for businesses who operate across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So another layer of complexity is added with the in vitro diagnostic requirements in Northern Ireland. So very recently, the UK government has published the Medical Devices In Vitro Diagnostics Amendment Regulation earlier in 2024, and this has become commonly known as the IVDR-NI. And this introduces the specific provisions for the implementation of the European IVDR in Northern Ireland. So in short, these can really be summarised as providing power for legal and financial penalties for Northern Ireland, for products placed on the Northern Ireland market which breach IVDR requirements. It appoints the UK Secretary of State and the MHRA as responsible for medical devices in Northern Ireland. Adds some requirements such as certain documentation must be available in English surrounding in vitro diagnostic devices. Changes some of the fees and structures surrounding items such as obtaining certificates of free sale for in vitro diagnostics, and around performance studies for in vitro diagnostic devices, adds a requirement for study sponsors to hold sufficient insurance, and also states that Northern Ireland-based performance studies can be supported by a Great Britain-based legal representative. It also adds that requirement in there to allow unfettered access of goods produced in Northern Ireland to be produced to be placed on the Great Britain market without any additional trade barriers. And finally, puts into law that the UK NI marking must be affixed for devices which are conformity assessed by UK approved bodies against IVDR requirements. So companies that are trading in Northern Ireland or are based in Northern Ireland do need to ensure compliance with the IVDR and meet the specific requirements for documentation and performance studies. So we've covered so far a little bit of the past of UK regulation and some of the history and also where we are today. So now let's take a further look at what the future may hold for UK MedTech regulation. So I think it's fair to say that the future of UK MedTech regulation has been quite frustrating for manufacturers. It's quite a fast-moving area at the moment, and it has been quite challenging to keep up with. The MHRA have produced a roadmap which outlines significant changes, and their aim is that this will strengthen the UK's regulatory framework while encouraging innovation. And a key aspect of this is enhancing the MHRA's powers, allowing it to take more decisive actions to ensure the safety, efficacy, and also availability of medical devices on the British market. One of the things that the roadmap does do is emphasize international recognition routes, and some of these have been proposed so far, and I'll cover that in a little bit more depth later. And the idea of this will hopefully allow faster market access for safe devices which have already been approved by regulators such as the FDA, Health Canada, or by notified bodies based in the European Union. At the same time, what we see is that the MHRA is placing a greater focus on cybersecurity and around the regulation of software as a medical device and AI as a medical device. Obviously, this is a very fast-moving area that regulators worldwide have been struggling to keep up with. These new regulations will really aim to address vulnerabilities in digital health products, ensuring software-based devices entering the UK market are safe and secure. So we are expecting some changes later in 2024, primarily the introduction of the post-market surveillance regulation. However, I think 2025 is likely to be the pivotal year where we will see the introduction of a new core regulation for medical devices in the UK. And hopefully once this is drafted and once we can get sight of it, this will make it easier for companies to really plan for the future and navigate the upcoming requirements. And the MHRA have done a consultation on what the future of the regulation should look like, and one of the things they set out in this is the 5 pillars that they want to build the revised regulation around. And these were around strengthening the MHRA's power to act to protect public health and safety, and making the UK a focus for medtech innovation, addressing health inequalities and mitigating bias through medtech, proportionate regulation and international recognition, and setting world-leading standards. So the MHRA has released roadmaps of where it looks to take the future regulation, and there was also a comprehensive consultation document with the UK government response, which allows us to really determine a little bit about how the future regulations may look. This is not an exact science at the moment, and we don't have anything set in stone, but it's good to be able to really have some idea of where we may be heading. So I want to share that with you now. So the changes the MHRA are proposing are really intended to modernize the system while maintaining alignment with global standards, and in particularly, I think, alignment with the EU, which we are currently being diverging from. And it's also worth mentioning that the current government has had an attitude of wanting to really improve relations with the EU, whereas perhaps the previous government was diverging more. So we may expect some other changes there as well. Some things we can expect are scope expansion. So like the EU MDR, the UK may expand the scope of its regulations to cover products without a medical purpose. These are things such as perhaps dermal fillers and coloured contact lenses, and also add new definitions and regulatory requirements specifically intended for software as a medical device, artificial intelligence as a medical device, and machine learning as well. We can expect the classification rules to change with a focus on implantable devices and software. This is expected to be more aligned with the EU MDR. So we should expect to see really a reclassification of certain devices, particularly software, reusable surgical instruments as well. In terms of traceability, the MHRA is looking to be keen to improve this. And in the consultation, this was something that was heavily supported by industry and patients. So they will look to introduce unique device identification, which has already been implemented in the USA and also is being implemented under the new EU regulations for greater traceability. They'll also look to develop the online database for registering devices and ensuring traceability, perhaps adding the possibility to access information such as vigilance reporting and summaries of safety and clinical performance through there as well. Obviously, the compliance to any regulation is based around the essential requirements or the general safety and performance requirements. We are expecting that the UK regulations will change to adopt a UK-specific version of the EU MDR's general safety and performance requirements. And this will likely include some UK-specific provisions like a specific requirement to list allergens and sensitizers, for example. Surrounding clinical evaluation, I think the direction of travel will be for stricter requirements for demonstrating clinical equivalence, particularly. Manufacturers will have to demonstrate comprehensive biological, technical, and clinical data for new devices, similar to we are currently seeing in the EU, and there will be a much greater emphasis on running robust clinical investigation for higher risk devices. There may also be some additional requirements for products without an intended medical purpose. We also know that cybersecurity is a huge concern globally, and it is for the MHRA and the UK government as well. So we can expect new and specific requirements around cybersecurity for all types of medical devices that contain software, but particularly for software as a medical device and AI as a medical device products, addressing data protection, privacy, confidentiality, and security risks. Around post-market surveillance, we've already seen a little of this through the draft post-market surveillance amendment. There will be stricter post-market surveillance requirements, including mandatory post-market surveillance plans and system, and periodic safety update reporting for higher risk devices. There's also likely to be a requirement that the MHRA must be notified by manufacturers before they implement any field safety corrective actions, and a requirement for mandatory field safety notices to be sent out to all users. Interestingly, we currently have the person responsible for regulatory compliance, which is a position now mandated under the EU MDR at medical device manufacturers and authorised representatives. It's likely that there will be the introduction of a role known as the qualified person in the UK, and that is strongly supported in the consultation document. And this will really mean that everyone will have to appoint a qualified person with experience in MedTech to be responsible for ultimate product quality and release. So all of these changes really reflect the MHRA's goal of creating a regulatory framework that supports innovation whilst maintains high safety standards. And as the new regulations take shape, companies will need to stay vigilant to remain compliant. So a little bit more on international recognition routes, which I mentioned earlier. As part of the regulatory future, the MHRA is keen to develop international recognition routes, and a proposal for this was published quite recently. The idea at current is to streamline market access for devices which have already been approved in a selected number of trusted international regulatory authorities. And really, the key points around this are that they're looking to accept devices which have been approved by the FDA, Health Canada, the European Union, and the Australian TGA, and that these could benefit from a faster route to market in Great Britain. There's also some mention that they are considering adding Japan with the PMDA to this list of recognised regulatory partners in future. And what will the requirements for recognition be? Well, essentially that the device first and foremost needs to be approved in a comparable regulatory country, as I've just listed, and that then they must adhere to some additional specific UK requirements around English language labelling and packaging, compliance with GB-specific electronic compatibility and measurement units, for example, and labelling of CMRs, for example, and also appointment of the UK responsible person and application of UDI, along with meeting UK-specific post-market surveillance requirements. There will be some limitations and exclusions, and not all devices will be eligible for international recognition. I think specifically custom-made devices will not be eligible, devices of in-house manufacture, and also it's stated that they will not accept software as a medical device which relies on predicate equivalence under a US 510K. or Class 2B implantables or Class 3 high-risk devices that require on equivalence for approval. The goal is really to provide this faster, more efficient route to market and allow availability of high quality, safe medical devices for the UK healthcare sector as well. So importantly, while this process will grant these devices market access, it will not result in a UKCA mark or certification, and that would still require a separate assessment if required. So looking at post-market surveillance, this is also undergoing significant reform. The new regulation has been drafted, the Post-Market Surveillance Requirements Amendment, and this is currently out. It's recently been reviewed by the World Trade Organization, and the comments have been received, and it's expected to be finalized and put into force before the end of 2024. This will apply to all devices, whether they're placed on the UK market under a UKCA mark, or if they are CE marked as either a legacy device or an EU MDR compliant device. So this is really imminent, that manufacturers will need to be complying with this very soon, as soon as it goes into force. But the changes shouldn't really be alien or a shock to anyone who's already looking to align with the EU MDR. The introduction is a very similar concepts, such as more robust post-market surveillance system, minimum requirements for post-market surveillance plan, and requirements for periodic safety update reporting for Class 2A devices and above. So now let's just take a short amount of time to just think about digital health technologies. So what is a digital health technology? Really, it's any standalone software, website, or app-based technology which is intended to benefit people or the wider health and social care system. And these may or may not be medical devices, depending on what they do. Digital health technologies are becoming increasingly important, especially within the NHS, where anything from wearable health devices to AI-driven software is really being used to revolutionize and streamline healthcare delivery. The NICE have published an evidence standard framework which allows these technologies to be separated into three tiers. And the top tier here should be, which is actually tier C, this should be tier A down here, just a typo there. The top tier here in tier C are most likely to be medical devices. Having said this, all digital health technologies, including those which are not medical devices, must still meet evidence standards to be utilised in the UK healthcare system. And these are focused mainly around the demonstration of value, cost benefit, and having clear clinical benefits, performance, and credibility. They're also, in line with the MHRA and the NHS's aims, need to be able to eliminate inequalities and bias in healthcare. And they should all have sufficient professional oversight. They should be designed with good data practice and safety. And it's also very important to ensure that digital health technologies can promote interoperability within the UK healthcare systems by being able to interface with other NHS software, such as patient information systems, and that robust cybersecurity and data protection measures are in place to protect patients. So around this, the NHS has the Digital Technology Assessment Criteria, also known as the DTAC. This outlines the technical standards for digital health products which are used within the UK health system. And really, to successfully access the NHS market, manufacturers need to ensure that their products meet DTAC requirements early on. And these cover aspects such as interoperability, risk management, and usability. And of course, cybersecurity continues to be a critical concern, and developers must, from the early stage, ensure their products are designed to be secure from cyber threats, especially as digital health expands as an industry. And I know there'll be more on that later in this session today. So manufacturers of non-device digital health technologies, as well as software as a medical device and AI as a medical device, can benefit from the use of internationally recognized state-of-the-art standards in their development, design, and deployment, and some of the critical standards are listed here. And I think it's fair to say that any successful digital health technologies and manufacturers will ensure they plan to meet the NICE evidence standard requirements and the DTAC from the early concept and design stage to ensure market acceptance. So we're at the end of my section now of today's webinar. So in summary, we've covered quite a lot. The UK regulatory landscape is evolving rapidly, and there are new requirements surrounding UKCA marking, special arrangements for Northern Ireland, and a clear MHRA roadmap in place for future reform. We can see that digital health technologies are set to play a larger role, both within the NHS and beyond. So as we move forward, it's important to stay informed and proactive, and this is key to navigating the regulatory challenges ahead. So thank you everyone for your attention, and I hope you found this section of today's webinar insightful and informative. I will now pass back over to my colleague Jay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob, for giving us a very detailed overview of what's going to happen, what is happening, and what the medical device manufacturers can expect in the upcoming days. There is quite a lot of requirements that are going to come in very shortly, and quite timely, as you mentioned, that MedTech manufacturers should be aware and be ready. But again, if they are following the EU MDR, they could be little relaxed, well, which I think which is still just a question mark, because does EU MDR give you time to relax at all? Anyway, so thanks, Jacob. Again, to all our viewers, all the meeting teams members, please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A section of this feature. I guess it is enabled for all of you already. So feel free to post in your comments and your questions. I am moderating those questions, and towards the end of the session, we will be having an active Q&A round where everyone will be allowed and have an option to interact directly with Sharam, John, and Jacob. As you can see on the screen right now, we are happy to announce that the Global Regulatory Services is now launching a new service known as the Regulatory Virtual Importer, which is known as RVI, where we will be acting as a virtual importer and ensuring compliance for all the manufacturers and all the importers who are unable to fulfill the regulatory requirements. You can see there is a link on the slide at the bottom of the slide. Feel free to explore our webpage. If you go on globalregulatoryservices.com, under the services section, you will see the RVI page, and you can explore what new services and what all is covered under as a regulatory virtual importer, a new service offered by Global Regulatory Services, GRS. Without wasting any further time, I would now like to pass this entire webinar to Sharam. Sharam will be talking about a little more in detail about what's happening, the comparison between EU MDR FDA 510K and the UKCA, that is the UK MDR 2002 requirements. So over to you, Sharam.
Thank you, Jay. And also thank you, my colleague Jacob, for the comprehensive presentation. I hope that I can add more points to Jacob's presentation. That's what's really extensive. Now I want to compare different regulatory territories in special and clear procedures. When, in fact, the comparison between EU MDR, FDA, and UK MDR requirements is the main point of my presentation. When we're discussing regulatory requirements for medical devices, it's important to understand the differences and similarities between the major regulatory frameworks. EU Medical Device Regulation, FDA, United States, and UKCA under UK MDR in United Kingdom. The main area of differences are registration, technical documentation, conformity assessment, quality management system requirements, clinical evaluation, and post-market surveillance. And now I want to start with exploring the registration process and differences of this procedure under each regulatory framework. Now, registration process. It's good. It's important to mention that the registration process is a foundational step in regulatory pathway for medical devices. For example, in the EU, devices must be registered in the European database, EUDAMID. As my colleague mentioned, Jacob, once it's been fully functional, the registration involves notification of the relevant national competent authority in the EU member states where the medical device is marketed. In US market, manufacturers must submit a pre-market notification which demonstrates that their medical devices are substantially equivalent to a legally marketed medical devices and some other medical devices that now are marketed and exist in the US market. And registration with FDA is mandatory for all medical device manufacturers, and each establishment must list the devices in what it's manufactured and provided in the US market. In the UK, medical device must be registered with MHRA in a special platform that I will mention in the further present slides. The registration process differs slightly between Great Britain and Northern Ireland due to the Northern Ireland new protocols. Manufacturers and also UK responsible persons in the UK market must use the MHRA medical device online registration system, known as DOORS, to register their products, which includes detailed information about the medical device, its risk classification, intended use, also target population, and also manufacturer's details. And it should be mentioned that in the post-registration step in the UK market, MHRA may conduct unannounced audit, inspection, or even audit to check the ongoing compliance and maybe request additional information to ensure ongoing compliance. Another area of differences between the mentioned regulatory frameworks that I want to go in is technical documentation. Technical documentation requirements vary across regions. For example, in the EU MDR, it requires extensive technical documentation, including description of medical device, its intended use, design verification and validation, also clinical evaluation, and the target population. This documentation must be maintained and updated throughout the entire medical device life cycle. For FDA, for example, documentation must include a substantial equivalence comparison. I mean to find the proper predicate in the US market, and also device description and supporting evidence like clinical data, clinical real data, and also biocompatibility and sterilization data. But it should be mentioned that the level of clinical evaluation data for FDA may vary depending on the device type and also medical device classification. UKCA for UK Great Britain market requires comprehensive technical documentation similar to EU MDD, Medical Device Directive, focusing on demonstrating conformity with Annex 1 essential requirements, and also new UK specific requirements for labeling and IFU should be considered for UK market. Another main procedure that I want to evaluate the differences in different regulatory pathways, conformity assessment. Conformity assessment procedure depends on the risk classification of each medical device. In EU MDR, the conformity assessment route depends on the medical device classification. Exactly. For example, for higher risk medical devices like class 2A, class 2B, and class 3 medical device, involvement of a notified body is mandatory in the EU market. Involvement of notified body includes audits, a product review, CE marking, and unannounced audits. In FDA, conformity assessment involves demonstrating substantial equivalent to a predicate device, as I mentioned before, always reviewed directly by FDA itself without notified body involvement. While in the UK market, UK MDR, in UK MDR, conformity assessment depends on the medical device risk classification, exactly the same as EU MDR. And for higher risk medical devices, the involvement of the UK approved body is required. It includes audit, product review, certification, and it's good to mention that the self-certification is permitted for class 1 medical devices in UK market. Another key area is quality management system. Quality management system is crucial for regulatory compliance and also to show the regulator to compliance with the regulations. In EU, a quality management system comply with the ISO 13485 is typically required, especially for class 2 and class 3 medical devices. This includes procedures for risk management, risk control, risk mitigation, design control. Also, I emphasize that the design verification validation and post-market surveillance, also post-clinical follow-up. In the US, manufacturers must comply with the QSR, quality system regulations that's outlined in 21 CFR Part 820. It should be mentioned that this part was recently updated to Quality Management System Regulation, QMSR, which more aligned with ISO 13485, but still with some extra requirements for FDA. Like EU MDR, a quality management system aligned with ISO 13485 is expected for in UK. Covering all aspects, this quality management system should cover all aspects of design, manufacturing, and distribution to ensure product safety, efficacy, and performance. Clinical evaluation or clinical evidence. Clinical evaluation requirements differ significantly across the different regulatory frameworks. For example, for EU MDR, it requires to show the rigorous clinical evaluation and investigation. These evidences often requiring clinical trial for higher risk medical devices to provide robust evidence. While for FDA, clinical data may not always be required, depending on the type of medical device and its risk classification, and whether the substantial equivalence, I mean the predicate one, can be demonstrated without additional data. In UK MDR, clinical evaluation requirements are aligned with the previous EU directive and MedTech 2.71 revision 4 It means that previous regulation and rules in the EU, with the focus on demonstrating safety and performance and efficacy of the medical device. Post-market surveillance. Post-market surveillance is vital for ongoing compliance for the medical device and manufacturers. EU MDR requires continuous monitoring and reporting of device performance in the market, including vigilance, trend report, PSUR, periodic safety update report, and post-market clinical follow-up. While in the US and for FDA, manufacturers should have a PMS process in place, including reporting of adverse events, especially severe adverse events, and the device malfunction under medical device reporting system and regulations. But according to EU MDR, UK MDR, post-market surveillance requires are currently similar to EU MDR, as I mentioned, and follow the MDD MedDev guidance to show the ongoing compliance with regulations, and surveillance and vigilance reporting and PSUR are mandatory for UKCA. Now, a brief discussion regarding the GB market access requirements. Great Britain market access requirements. To access the GB market for the medical devices, it's essential to understand the specific regulatory requirements, especially after Brexit, post-Brexit landscape. Key components for the Great Britain market is the MHRA registration process and also role and responsibility, to understand clearly the role and responsibility of the UK responsible person. And now, to define these two key procedures in the Great Britain market, first, we have to go through a registration process. The key points, some key points regarding the MHRA registration process is that it's mandatory for all type of medical devices. For example, for in vitro diagnostic devices, custom-made medical devices, all must be registered in MHRA platform doors before putting into the market and be available in the market in the Great Britain. And this registration, good to mention that for all medical devices, even for low-risk medical device like Class 1 medical devices. Manufacturers and UK responsible person must use the MHRA platform doors for registration that they provide detailed information about each medical device. And as I mentioned before, post-registration step is very, very important in the UK market. The MHRA may conduct audit, unannounced audit and inspection, or maybe request further information to ensure ongoing compliance of medical device in the market. The role and responsibility of the UK responsible person is very, very important. It's good for all manufacturers to grasp clearly of the role and responsibility of the UK responsible person. In fact, the UK RP acts as on behalf of the non-UK manufacturer to ensure compliance with the Great Britain regulatory requirements. And I should mention the key responsibility includes for the UK responsible person, like device registration, compliance assurance, maintaining technical documentation, and also collaborating with MHRA for post-market surveillance and corrective actions in case for recalls, and ensuring labeling and IFU correctivity. And now, as my last slide, I want to go through the obligation of the UK importers. Why? Because UK importers play a critical role in Great Britain market by bringing a medical device into GB market from outside of the UK, and they should be sure regarding the compliance. UK importers are responsible for some activities like verification of compliance. In fact, they should be sure about the imported device, and also to be sure comply with the UK regulation and registered medical device in MHRA platform. Also they are responsible to documentation and record keeping. In fact, they have to maintain records, including UKCA certificates and the declaration of conformity, at least, this is the deadline, at least for 10 years after the last device marketed in the Great Britain. Also, they're responsible for labeling and traceability. They have to cooperate with the MHRA to report adverse events and non-compliance issues in the market. And also, as the main point, they're responsible to prepare storage and handling to ensure devices are stored and transformed under conditions that preserve these medical devices safe, and also to be sure that these medical device regarding the safety, performance, and efficacy. Thank you, Jay. Over to you. That was my last slide.
Thank you so much, Sharam, for giving us a very important update on how the UK MDR, the EU MDR, and how the US FDA submissions are working all across. Thank you once again, and thanks for highlighting the obligations of an importer. And I would like to take this moment to again highlight that GRS has launched a regulatory virtual importer as a service. And apart from that, we are also happy to announce that in order to support the wider sections of the life sciences, we are happy to announce the launch of the GDP course, that is Good Distribution Practice courses, where GRS is offering good distribution practice for operations training and also for the drivers. So again, you can go back to the GRS website, and on the services page, you will see GDP courses as one of the page headlines, and you can explore that section and book a course for yourself whenever you would like to do the same. Without any further delay, I would now like to pass on the presentation, the webinar baton to John from EG Technology. Hello, John.
Hello there. And thank you very much to Jacob and Sharam for their presentations. That was really good. So I'd like to follow up on something that Jacob mentioned, was that the regulatory market at the moment is very active for cybersecurity, for AI as a medical device, for software as a medical device. It's a very dynamic situation at the moment. So to just dive into one of those subjects, I thought I'd choose cybersecurity. It's a little bit more well-formed than AI. AI is still very much in its development phase as far as regulation is concerned. So I thought I'd have a quick look through the cybersecurity, a little bit about what is cybersecurity. There's a few misconceptions about that, and how cybersecurity applies to medical devices, and then move on towards the regulations and the regulatory environment, and a few differences between the few regulatory bodies. So moving on, I'd like to bring up this slide. There's a bit of, as I said, there's a bit of a misconception about what cybersecurity actually means. This is the official definition, if you like, from ISO 81001. It's quite a dense sentence that they've put in there, and it covers a lot. So it's not just about third parties getting access to your device. It encompasses other activities as well. So as you can see from that, it covers the definition covers the protection of information and devices. So it's not just about the device, it's about the information on the device as well. And by protection, we mean access to the device, the use of the device, disclosure of information from the device, disrupting the device's operation, modifying how it works, or essentially destroying either data or, in extreme cases, the device itself. And that, how is that measured? How do we test that we have reached that level of cybersecurity? Well, we need to ensure that the confidentiality of information, so that information can't be extracted, that the device is, the integrity of the device cannot be compromised, and that it can't be put out of action. So in terms of devices, that's, people hack into devices, IoT devices, but it also means software as well. So you can't subvert what the software does, or you can't subvert its availability. Denial of service attacks on websites is an example of that. So you need to maintain that level of cybersecurity through an acceptable life of its life cycle. So that means not only that when it's out there, that in its maintenance phase, and throughout whichever software versions that you've got, it maintains its cybersecurity. So cybersecurity has got this thing called the CIA triad, nothing to do with the American organization. CIA is for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are the three main concepts. There are, I put another two down there as well, which are also very important. Confidentiality, so that the information, and especially for medical devices, that the information is on there is only accessible to authorized individuals or organizations. The integrity part of it, so can the device be tampered with? Can it be modified so that it doesn't give the right results, and along that sort of line? And that can be done through the data. We can put checksums on the data. We can put encryption algorithms in there to protect the data, and all of those sort of usable standard software techniques can provide cybersecurity. The availability side of things is, can we keep a website up and running? Can we keep the device running if it's attacked on the web or over Bluetooth or over Wi-Fi? Those are the main three cybersecurity concepts. The other two at the bottom are authenticity and non-repudiation. These are also very important. Authenticity means that you can identify the users of the software of a medical device, so that you know that they are allowed to use certain features. For example, you might have administrative users who can do more tasks than a standard user, so that you need to know who the user is and that they can't be impersonated. And that also leads into non-repudiation, so that medical devices and software can log who performed a test and guarantee that that person did it, so that later on, if there's any evidence needed, it can show that nobody can repudiate that a test was done by a particular person. Those are the sort of key elements of cybersecurity. That's a rounded, it's a very overview of it, but essentially those principles are what is needed. So how do we apply that for medical devices and software as a medical device? So software, we can ensure the integrity and security of the software. We can use strong encryption algorithms. There are many of them around now. They take many years to break the encryption. There are some very strong algorithms out there. With testing, so we can identify any vulnerabilities, and then if we've identified a vulnerability, we can release a software patch or an update to a device, and so that its software can be updated to protect it. against any intrusion. Also in medical devices, there are certain hardware security features that you can build in. A lot of the embedded processors that are used in medical devices have hardware security measures baked into the silicon. And these are secure enclaves for storing data and secure boot processes and physical protection mechanisms so that if anybody tries to access it, the device itself physically, they can detect it and protect themselves. And also the secure storage of sensitive data and something like a secure data enclave. The main attack vector for any sort of software as a medical device or a medical device itself is through the internet. It's a ubiquitous network, and IoT devices are very, very commonplace. The network security can be put in. So if it's a website, for example, you would use a secure HTTP as opposed to standard HTTP, which is almost ubiquitous now anyway. But we have strong networking and communication security measures in place, firewalls, etc., so that we can protect against any incoming attacks or measures trying to circumvent the security of the device. In terms of development and what the regulatory authorities would like to see in terms of cybersecurity, they would like to see a cybersecurity plan so that you can demonstrate that you have thought about cybersecurity and you've incorporated it into your design. So the risk assessment be looking for, in the same way that we do, say, a design FMEA of a system. So looking for the failure modes, what its effects are, and doing the analysis on that. We can also do a cybersecurity FMEA. So we come up with what are all the possible risks that we can think of, how likely are they to occur, what is the effect of that attack on the device itself, and what mitigations that we can put in place to ensure that it's not going to be there. So the risk analysis is a very important part of the cybersecurity plan. And again, that follows on from IC 14971 is the standard for putting in risk assessments. As well as in the cybersecurity plan, we've been looking to implement security controls. So as I mentioned before, we want a roles-based access to the device, so the administrator can set up other users or can set parameters on the device, whereas the standard user can just go in and use the device without being able to change its behavior. We also need device monitoring. So we can then use analysis of the device itself. So as if the device creates logs, which virtually every one of them does, you can analyze that. You can upload those logs to the cloud, and you can analyze them to see if there's any anomalies or patterns that would identify some sort of security breach. And the data, if there's data going backwards and forwards between the device and the cloud, we can also monitor that data as well to see if there's any changes, any change in behavior. So you can, with telemetry, you can monitor the device's behavior and flag any unusual patterns. The final part of the security plan is to put in place a regular audit plan, so that on a periodic basis you look at all the threats that have been out there. There are software is very complex. It's made up of a lot of quite complicated algorithms, but also third-party pieces of software, and quite often, security vulnerabilities are found in these third-party libraries. So a regular review of all of those libraries to find out, has anything, any security announcements been made about it? And if so, what impact does it have on the software controlling the device or the software in the cloud, and what procedures need to be taken in place. Does an update need to be made? How does it need to be rolled out? Do you need to report it back to the regulatory authorities to say there's a cyber threat against one of your products? So it's quite an involved process, but this cybersecurity plan is what the regulator is really looking for. It tells them that you've thought about all the concepts and you can demonstrate that you've thought about it, and you have plans in place in case something goes wrong. Now that we've sort of talked about the cybersecurity and in the device as well, let's move on to the regulation side of things. And there are a lot of different pieces of regulation, both EU, UK, and in America and the FDA as well, to deal with cybersecurity. Not all of them are obvious that they deal with cybersecurity, but they do. In the EU, the EU Cybersecurity Act came out, and that put in place a cybersecurity certification framework where you could put your product, service, or process and have it assessed and have it certified that it was taking into account the latest cybersecurity regulations. Earlier this year, I think it was May the 20th, this Cyber Resilience Act came out in the EU. Now, this is the next notch up in the regulation, really. This is a legal framework that describes the cybersecurity requirements for hardware and software projects. This means that you need to be able to demonstrate that you follow all the requirements. So it's a legal framework as opposed to a certification framework. Aligned with this is the NIS2, Network Information Security Systems Directives. NIS and NIS2. NIS2 has come out recently. There was an update to it, and NIS, I think, is still being used in the UK until later on this year. I think there are some more updates coming along, whether it's this year or next year, it depends. Also, the GDPR and Data Protection Act has an impact on cybersecurity, because if you have medical device in your software or on your device, you will need to make sure that it's protected, and that can be done with encryption or the other methods I've mentioned already. And ISO 27001 is that you have systems put in place for the security of data, and that's again another requirement, although not specifically targeted at cybersecurity. It's about the protection of the data. And the final one on there is the cybersecurity of medical devices, the IMDRF. Again, this is an American one, but it involves the cybersecurity aspects of medical devices. And that's kind of a wrap-up of a very, very high-level wrap-up of what's involved in the legislation for security, cybersecurity in the EU and UK. Moving over, we move on to the MDR. This is, they've introduced stricter requirements for all medical devices. So again, as Jacob mentioned earlier, software as a medical device is now becoming much more prevalent. It's not just devices, it's software systems as a whole, and AI as a medical device. They're now considered to be medical devices in themselves, and so as such, they need to follow all the regulations. Also, 82304 covers the software device that are not medical software that's run on a non-medical device, such as a mobile phone, is also quite regulated now. The regulations require the manufacturer to develop medical devices according to state of the art. It's a bit of an ambiguous term, but and it's state of the art constantly changes. So that kind of reinforces the fact that in your cybersecurity plan, you need to make account of the fact that things will change. Systems will be broken into. There will be roots found against certain libraries and pieces of software, and so there needs to be constant vigilance with what is going on in the security world to ensure that if there's any impact on the medical device that you're looking after is still secure, and if so, if a breach is found, what impact does it have on yourself, and how do you move forward? So I've listed a few of the regulations down there, the MDR and IVDR, and the cybersecurity for medical devices one is also out there as well. All of those contain all the cybersecurity regulations that are needed to be looked after. And finally, on to the FDA's perspective on this. The pre-market management of cybersecurity devices is their latest. It's actually the second link in the list there. They have a very good website. So cybersecurity one at the top there, that contains links to all sorts of their pre-guidance documents for pre-submission. It's an extremely good website if you want to find out. And the last part there is the latest pre-market cybersecurity guidance, which was a slight update. That proposes to change the existing documentation so that a software bill of materials is now a requirement, so that you list all the components in your software, but a much more involved process now. And they've also introduced risk management about software supporting maintenance, and also disclosure of vulnerabilities. They are very keen that any vulnerability is disclosed, so that's very keen on their view at the moment. As Jacob said earlier, and I'll reiterate, this is a very rapidly changing regulatory landscape. It's especially concerning cybersecurity and artificial intelligence processes software. So I suppose one of the key things is, if you are designing a medical device or some software, then consulting a regulatory consultancy who specializes in this area and keep abreast of all of this information is a very good step to take, just to make sure that you are keeping up with the state of the art, as has been described earlier. So that concludes my section here. So Jay, back to yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for giving a brief overview of how the cybersecurity and the software dynamics is changing across the European Union and the UK. I'm sure a lot of software as a medical device manufacturers might benefit from this information. Just while we were having this discussion, I thought, okay, it's good time to pull up one important slide from EIT Health. But before I go there, I would request everyone or any of the attendees, if they would like to raise any questions. I can see there is one question already there in the chat section, and I will pull that up shortly. But before that, I wanted to highlight that EIT Health has a few flagship calls open. They are inviting the communities and beyond to work with them on tackling specific challenges relating to some key health priority areas. The two flagship calls that are open are the reindustrialization of Europe and digital transformation of healthcare. So you can visit the website www.eithealth.eu and you can find out more information. They have some regular education programs also going on under their service offerings, so feel free to explore them. So feel free to pop on their website and find out more in details. Going back to this webinar, this is the time for questions and answers. So if any of our attendees have any questions, they can pop it into the Q&A section or the chat section of Teams. In the meantime, there is a question which asks how the realm of responsible AI regulation affects the digital health interventions? Do you recommend that healthcare AI frameworks require sectoral regulations and precise system development? And I guess this question is more for John and Jacob to have a little discussion on. Maybe John could be the right one to answer this question from Honey.
Yeah, sure. AI regulation is very much in its infancy. That is, it's attempting to catch up with the state of the art in AI, but the state of the art in AI keeps moving at a phenomenal rate. I think we're up to ChatGPT-4 or ChatGPT-5. Now it's just moving so phenomenally fast. So the regulation, AI regulation, hasn't really caught up. There is guidance out there. Certainly have a look at the FDA's website for guidance on what AI regulation is out there. It essentially involves it's a risk analysis problem again. So you need to be able to assure that the AI model that you've built, so that you've trained it on a certain set of data, that you have a separate set of data that you test against, so that you can guarantee that the training has worked. And also the other thing is, in part of the risk analysis, is to work out what all the edge cases are for your AI model. For example, if you're developing a system that scans, say, a retina, you then train the AI on images of brown eyes, blue eyes, and then you think, great, we're done. And then somebody points out, well, there's green eyes and there's hazel eyes. And then what about people with macular degeneration? And so the list goes on, and you have to encompass all of those in your training model. So that's the risk analysis part of it, and good AI practice is what they say. I would certainly have a look at the FDA's website, and on there are certain in the same way there's a cybersecurity page, there's an AI page that I don't have the link off my head at the moment, but there is one on there, and that gives a very good overview of what they're looking at. It's still in the guidance stage. It's not, the EU are a little bit further ahead. There's the EU Act, which is the kind of the leader on this at the moment. And they emphasize the ethics around your AI model. If you can determine that somebody's going to get cancer in 5 years' time, there are certain ethics around that, and do you tell the rest of the family, or you can spot that a part of your DNA makes you more liable for a disease. What are the ethics around that? Because it may or may not happen, but along those side of things. And they also the regulations for that any AI model must be applicable without any sort of prejudice to all groups. Those are some key parts of the AI Act, as well as the training of the models and validation, security, and risk. There is an overlap between AI and cybersecurity because, in effect, if you've managed to break the cybersecurity of a system, you could change the AI model and subvert it. So there's a bit of a crossover in there as well. So that's kind of my take on the question.
Great explanation, John. I know we're fast running out of time, but just to add in there, I think to answer this question, the MHRA have a working group currently looking at regulation of software as a medical device and AI. And as part of that, they have a number of work packages surrounding AI. And I think from that, what we can really glean is that a separate sector-specific AI regulation for MedTech is probably unlikely, and that they will look really to amend the UK MDR with perhaps some essential requirements under Annex 1 that specifically relate to areas of software and AI. And then they will look for this to be met by manufacturers through utilizing existing regulatory frameworks and additional industry standards out there, which, as John has quite rightly mentioned, is a very fast-moving area, and there aren't a lot of clear guidances out there at the moment. But just a couple of things the MHRA have in their work package that they say they're going to do over the next few years is really to map some of those standards to AI requirements and say, okay, which standards do we expect you to use to demonstrate that your AI is effective? And also that they will provide a lot of supplementary guidance, but not regulation, around AI safety and effectiveness, how that can be demonstrated, and technical methods that can be put in place to test and stress AI systems to, again, demonstrate safety.
And hopefully on the software side of things, 62304 may well have a annex or something along those lines to highlight cybersecurity needs.
Yeah, I would agree, John. I think 62304 is probably well overdue an update with the fast evolving state of software development in general.
Yeah.
Thank you, John and Jacob. I think there is another webinar already in the making where we can talk more about the AI regulations and how the software as a medical device should be developed. But I can see there are no many questions, and considering the time, it is a good time to put an end to this webinar. Once again, everyone has an option to drop us an email and ask your follow-up questions. I'm sure John, Jacob, and Sharam would be ready to answer those questions. Anything that is related to your queries, feel free to post them in. And once again, I would like to thank our panelists, John, Jacob, and Sharam, for joining us and guiding us throughout this webinar. Not to forget the mentioning points were thanks to Global Regulatory Services, Medidia, EG Technology, EIT Health, and our outreach partners, Health Innovation East and Digital Health and Care Alliance from the UK. Once again, thanks to all the attendees for joining in, and feel free to pop us a question or visit our websites for more details. Thank you once again. I will end this meeting now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.